Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to introduce here the team from IHS, from the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies. My name is Stelios Grafakos, and I work as a climate change specialist in urban areas since 2009. And I'm working particularly on developing decision support tools and methodologies for supporting decision makers to plan for climate change. And with me is Veronica Olivoto. Veronica.
Hi, it's very good to be in this webinar. I will also be the trainer coming to Hanover in April. And I've been working with Stelios, developing the CLIMACT Prio tool over the past 2 years. So I'm going to be here today listening to the conversation, taking up your comments and remarks, and I will see you later on then in April.
Okay, thanks, Veronica.
Okay, so as we have planned today, we're going to present the CLIMACT Prio tool, a decision support tool for climate actions prioritization. And the outline of this webinar, if I can go to the next slide. Yes. Yeah. So the outline, I think it's gone. Sorry for that. Yes. So first, we're going to have an introduction to the tool through the PowerPoint presentation. You can see my screen. Then we'll have some minutes on questions and answers. And then we're going to see together, step by step, the tool, how it functions, and see which is the flexibilities to apply it in different contexts, but also integrate different type of data and information. So, about the tool, the motivation behind this development of the climate actions prioritization tool was, of course, to support policymakers in urban areas and urban planners to go from the wish list when they have many different actions, mitigation or adaptation actions to implement in cities, to the short list. So how they can go to a short list of actions and measures that could be applicable, beneficial, effective, and efficient in their local context. Often there are most of the times, or always actually, limited budgets, and therefore not all actions can be implemented. Therefore, a kind of prioritization should be applied and also integrate all related priorities, which could be more than just climate mitigation or climate adaptation, but local development objectives and environmental objectives and so on could be integrated in the process. So when we were talking with Marek about how we could use the tool for the Urban LEDs project, we identified two main steps on the planning cycle of the Urban LEDs project, as was developed by CLIMACT. And I think the tool will be relevant for stage 3 and 4, which is the identification of priorities and development of the action plan by identifying the potential solutions or potential actions and assess the multiple impacts. So impacts not only related to reduction of emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, but also other local development impacts or environmental and so on. Furthermore, this tool and this approach is related to other type of methodologies and studies such as the Planning for Climate Change published from UN Habitat, the Sustainable Energy Planning published from CLIMACT and UN Habitat. Also, it's very much related to the multiple criteria analysis for climate, an initiative from UNEP, and another initiative and approach which is called Technology Need Assessment for Climate Change that has been initiated by the UNFCCC and UNDP. where we have applied this tool and where we are using it in research and advisory activities, either to support local governments or to conduct research on how different priorities are integrated in the planning for climate change. Furthermore, we have used, and this tool could be used for capacity building and training purposes. We have used widely this tool to train and provide capacity building to local governments, professionals, urban planners, and so on. Since we're an academic institute and we provide also educational services, we use also a lot this tool for exercises within our educational programs. Now, about the methodology that this tool is based is the multiple criteria analysis evaluation. I suppose some of you might be quite familiar with that process. It's a widely widely used approach in different contexts and in different sectors, where we use it to evaluate different alternatives against different criteria, and also assessing on one hand the impacts of the different alternatives, and on the other hand incorporating the different values, the different objectives of stakeholders. The objectives of this tool or process is to prioritize, of course, climate change related actions in cities, to support decision making, particularly in the framework of climate change planning, to integrate multiple objectives and apply a multiple criteria analysis, to enhance stakeholders' engagement and participation in the process, to facilitate also learning through this process, and stimulate knowledge generation and information exchange. Which are the main steps? So this presentation is mainly focused on planning process for climate mitigation or low carbon development. So when we want to identify actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, first of all, we should be based on a greenhouse gas emissions profile of the city. This is something that the tool could integrate information that have been generated by greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We all know that ICLEI is very active in that field. So by using information from a greenhouse gas emissions profile, we can plug in just this data as a basis for the analysis. Based on that, then we have the identification of potential actions. Looking at the sectors with most of emissions, we identify which actions we can apply, implement in order to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Then we need to identify, define the evaluation criteria, how we are going to evaluate and assess those actions. Normally those actions, they have multiple impacts. So they might have other co-benefits like reduction of local air pollution, which might be more relevant and more interesting for local authorities. Other local development objectives like generation of local jobs, or other social issues like acceptance of this action and so on. So all those evaluation criteria, objectives, and goals of different stakeholders, the idea is that in this step should be integrated. So not only climate mitigation or adaptation objectives, but broader than that, like sustainability objectives and so on. Of course, I have to say here that this is quite a participatory step, where different stakeholders can express their objectives, concerns, and so on. Then the next step is to really assess the performance of these alternative potential actions, measures, against our evaluation criteria, to see to which extent they meet our criteria, our objectives, to which extent they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. to which extent they reduce local air pollution, and so forth. For this stage, I have to say that normally this is based on existing studies or studies that could provide insights on the impacts of the different actions. Furthermore, we could integrate experts and expert judgments to really predict, project, or express their judgments regarding the impacts of those actions. So you could imagine this step is quite technical, I would say, and experts' incorporation in this phase is important. The next one is the standardization. What is standardization? The idea is that having multiple objectives being measured in different measurement units, like tons of CO2 emissions, hectares for land use, number of jobs. So having different units, how we can translate that in one common measurement scale. This step is called standardization. And because it's relatively complex and it's also techniques that are existing there, the tool has been devised in a way that automatically includes this step, so the user is not required to incorporate any data or information on that. So we have the standardization step automatically been generated in the tool, in the process. Then having the first idea of how the different actions perform after the standardization, translating all the different measurement units in one, then the next step is quite important for the whole process, because not all objectives or criteria have the same relative importance. In more developing countries' context, local economic development, generation of jobs might be much more important objectives than reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In developed countries where climate mitigation objectives are highly in the policy agenda, this might be the opposite. So different stakeholders also in different contexts, they have different values against those criteria and objectives. So within this process of weighting of criteria is a process that we elicit, we derive the preferences of stakeholders against the importance of the criteria. As you can imagine, this is a step which requires an integration or inclusion of different stakeholders and could be in the form of organization of stakeholders, consultation groups, and so on. And based on the weighting step and the scoring of the actions, so those are the main two input variables, so to say, we can determine the final prioritization of actions. So ranking the final actions from best to least. But I have to say here that this prioritization is relevant and is a context specific. So depending on the context, depending on the weighting of criteria, depending on how stakeholders value the different criteria, the final prioritization and ranking will be determined. So let's go quickly through the steps just to see how they look like in the tool. So as I said before, to give you a kind of a visual effect on that. So first step, to identify cities' greenhouse gas emissions profile. This is information obtained from a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Then identifying the alternative actions, solutions, measures, and so on. This is just what you see here is just an example. So we have different actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which could vary from solar hot water systems to electric vehicles, green energy supply, and so on, depending on the emissions profile we have and the sectors we want to focus. Then the next one is the criteria identification or objectives identification. We could identify variety of criteria ranging for climate to environmental, economic, feasibility related like technical feasibility or public acceptance, to more social criteria like creation of jobs or achievement of Millennium Development Goals. As you can see here, we need to identify also the different units, and you can see that we have different units for different evaluation criteria. But depending on the context and the available information and data, we could integrate qualitative scales, like from low to high impacts, from very low, moderate, high, very high impact, and this could be reflected in a scale from 1 to 5, for example. The evaluation criteria, I think you are quite familiar with that. Often evaluation criteria and indicators should be smart, specific, measurable, applicable, relevant, and time-bound. Furthermore, sensitive to change, really being able to measure and capture the change. Clear and understandable, of course, by everybody. Cost-effective, that we really can gather and obtain those data quickly. And of course, data should be there. The next step, as I mentioned before, is the scoring or the assessment, the impact assessment of the different actions against our evaluation criteria. Here in this example, it's an arbitrarily selected example. Here, as we saw before, we have different measurement units, but the idea for showing that to you is that we can integrate different measurement scales and different units in the process. And through the standardization step, we can translate all those scores, impacts, to a unitless score from 0 to 1, as you see here. So the maximum performance gets value 1, the minimum performance gets 0, and all the other scores are proportionally determined in this scale. And then we have all our actions, options measured in a common scale. Based on that, we can show that graphically, and this is automated by the tool. We can have a first sight on how our actions would perform against our criteria. What you see here, the more shadowed the area, means that the more effective is our action against the selected criteria. So you can see that the green energy supply scores very well. Actually, this was the best. It had the, relatively the best score on greenhouse gas emissions reduction and local air pollution. It's also widely accepted from the public. It could generate to a certain extent local jobs and could achieve to a certain extent the Millennium Development Goals. On the other hand, what you see is that it's quite costly, and that's why it's scored lower at the criterion of cost. So the next step is the weighting of criteria, where the stakeholders express their preferences against the relative importance of criteria. Here, this is quite a participatory process and could be based either on a consensus building workshop, where all stakeholders decide on the factors of relative importance, or also we could integrate different preferences and see the differences between stakeholders and have a discussion based on that. Through the tool, we can also see the divergence or convergence of stakeholders' preferences, views, Therefore, that means if there is high divergence, there is a requirement for further discussion on that, since this might be a potential for conflict. So based on this process, then we can determine the final ranking of our actions. This is the final results, and what we see here is how the different criteria and how the different scores in our criteria determine the final ranking. So what you can observe normally is that actions that have high score in the most important criteria, normally they are ranked at a very high level. This is, you can see that the green energy supply performs very well on local air pollution reduction, which was one of the most important criteria, but also on public acceptance and creation of jobs. Now, to conclude, the strong points of this tool, which often I like to call it as a process, because it's a process, it's more a process than a tool. So it doesn't really substitute thinking, but the idea is really to facilitate discussion, to be transparent and flexible, and provide support on the decision making. Also could function as a data gathering tool where we can store data for different actions against different criteria and also stakeholders' preferences. Could be a communication and learning process where stakeholders, they express their preferences, they see difference, they discuss on them, they exchange views, they exchange information and knowledge they have on that. And this also could be a good way to identify potential of conflicts. So if there are really great differences on these preferences. Some additional model, as you can see, and we will see briefly at the next part, this tool is based on Excel. It's Excel-based tool. That means that many people are familiar with Excel. And also this gives the flexibility to plug in and switch on and off certain modules. So we can have an expert judgment module, like having different expert judging for the impact of different criteria and integrating this information. Also having different stakeholders to express their preferences within the tool, and then determining the average and the divergence or convergence of their preferences. Also, we could have a prioritization of sectors. So apart from the emissions profile, we could have another module on looking on which sectors are the most important for the local community, the city, and so on. And also we could integrate and have different weighting methods, some more simple, some more complicated, and also additional standardization methods. Furthermore, we have some ideas, and already we have started some actions to develop additional modules. One is to generate a drop list of actions and criteria, where actions and criteria are by default integrated in the tool. The user can just click and see them and add in addition to those that are related to his or her context. So this is something that we are working on, and I think by applying the tool in different cases, we can expand this list of possible actions per sector and per type of problem, and also related evaluation criteria. Furthermore, screening of actions module, a kind of pre-feasibility, differentiating the criteria from feasibility criteria to more impact criteria. So having public acceptance or technical feasibility in those in the screening phase and differentiating from the next phase, which is more impact-related assessment. This is also something that we plan to incorporate. Then also we're working on adding a module on marginal abatement cost curves, where we could show only two criteria, costs and the main objective, which might be reduction of CO2 emissions or reduction of risk in case of adaptation. So we're working on developing such a kind of module. And the last one, we are thinking and planning also to integrate an interactions module, how different actions will interact with each other to explore synergies, trade-offs between them. So you could find some more information on related applications on the internet, and we could provide those to you from different studies. And I would like to thank you for that first part, and I will stop here. And we can have questions and answers round before going to see the tool step by step and see a little bit the different functions and discuss the different steps and see the actual tool. So any questions? Hello?
Any questions, people? Raise your hand, maybe just use that little function if you have any questions. In particular, I find it might be interesting to discuss the auto calculation. I find quite interesting what is already in the tool that can also help us with the weighting and scoring.
Right.
Yes, Ashish has a question. Let's unmute you.
This is Anand.
Go ahead.
Hello, this is Anand.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. I have a question regarding this stakeholder engagement. Like, do we have a set of questions that has to be discussed or that has been framed that which help or facilitate discussions? Is there any preset questions, or it is up to the stakeholders to discuss about?
Yeah, that's very relevant question. The idea is that this tool just supports the process. So all traditional ways of people communicating ideas, discussing, there is a flexibility to use traditional means like brainstorming techniques, boards, paper, keeping notes, and so on. The idea is that they keep on doing this in a traditional way, this stakeholders consultation, interaction in their own way, the way they want, and just we provide a guidance on the type of information that we would like to generate through this process and integrate this information in the process and show the implications of that. So as I said before, this tool aims to support a process of decision making, a planning process, and not to substitute or replace that. So the idea is not that everybody is sitting in front of one computer and filling in information and data. No. The idea is that following a process of a local government, certain type of information and data could be plugged in here and see the implications of those. Yeah. Of course, having something more automated or having different ways of incorporating stakeholders' preferences, this is something that we could think of. So your ideas and inputs for improving the process and the tool are more than welcome. For the time being, what we have is like the flexibility of including different preferences of different stakeholders, and based on that, in an automated manner, having and identifying what is the convergence or divergence of these preferences. So if most of stakeholders agree that the most important urgent issue is local air pollution, for example, and not greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see that through, you can see the precise difference in the process, in the tool. And of course, what is more important is to see the divergence. So the disagreements on certain criteria, and therefore this could point out that at this point, discussion is required, further discussion.
Thanks, Theos. I think Keshav also listed a question in the chat box. So he says, I guess we need to identify and select our own criteria, because in social they'll just select job creation and MDG, but there could also be more like happiness index, poverty reduction, and so on. So I guess that is quite true. The ICLEI colleagues who also shape or guide the training need to also motivate people to bring in other criteria that are highly relevant for sustainable development.
Absolutely. Marek, just to, I'm glad for this question. I would like to reiterate here that this is still flexible, and we will see that in the process, in the tool that we'll show on Excel. The idea is that the local government or the local stakeholders really identify their own criteria. This is just an example from a different case. So anything that is relevant in the local context should be brought here at this stage. The idea is that there is the flexibility to incorporate all different criteria and objectives that can be identified by various stakeholders.
I think maybe that's something we should actively address, also maybe training of our own staff on managing difficult processes where you have stakeholders who don't want to see eye to eye, that you also get a way of a good way, a diplomatic way of dealing with these challenging situations. Chang has a question. Maybe let's quickly see. Chang, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello, my name is Chang Dengbak. I typed my question already. My question is the step 1 is emission profile, but is having an emission profile a precondition for using the following steps? Because many cities may not have an emission profile yet, and to be honest, maybe reducing greenhouse gas may not be their top priority. Can they just directly start from step 2, like potential actions? That's all.
Thank you. Very relevant question as well. So as I said before, this example here that is shown is based on a prioritization process of climate mitigation actions. So it is tailor-made for mitigation, for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and for such a process, identification of greenhouse gas emissions profile is required. However, in other cases where the objectives are different, and it's not just greenhouse gas emissions reduction, of course, we can start the process by identifying the main objectives and goals, what we want to achieve, right? And based on that, we can identify then the different actions or possible solutions and so on. So I think, yes, that is true. This is context specific, and depending on the main objective and what we want to achieve, we can leave out this identification of emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions profile.
Okay.
But it's important to know
Great,
what we want to
Stephen,
achieve. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Stephen Davis has a question. Stephen, I'm unmuting you.
Okay,
Go
thanks,
ahead.
Marika. It's actually Stephen Bland who wants to ask the question. There are 3 of us listening on this particular connection. So we'll ask the
Wonderful.
question.
Good.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi. Hi, Stelios. My question was more around process and your experience of using this tool with local governments as you've used it with them, and sort of how long the process took to really be completed, and the degree to which stakeholders were involved at every stage, or whether it was sometimes just a municipality, or that would be interesting to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you an example from our experience when this was applied in the city of Dhaka, we organized two stakeholders groups. One was for the identification of criteria and objectives. In that case was this step 3. Whereas the actions were already identified by the local government. So we didn't spend time on identifying the alternative actions. So those were set. We organized the first stakeholder consultation group for the identification of criteria and objectives. Then we organized for the scoring step, we organized an expert judgment focus group discussion where different experts really expressed their judgments regarding the possible impacts that the alternative actions would have. And at the end we organized another stakeholders consultation group discussion for the weighting of criteria. So we spend, let's say, half day for the first stakeholders consultation group discussion and half day for the second one. So in that case, we were really somehow had to complete, because this was a research study. So the whole process was completed in 1 month, so to say. It was relatively quick. But you could imagine that this could be a long process, depending also on the whole process of local planning and decision making. Another related information to that was that we had some issues regarding the groups that participated in the process, and this could be a sensitive issue. So, for example, we had local communities, squatters actually in slums, that were afraid to sit at the same table with local government officials. So this is something that we could expect to happen, but this again reflects the complexities and difficulties of the local decision making and how you make a participatory process.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Stelios. I think that. So I think, shall we go to the actual tool to see how you complete that?
Fine.
Great.
Yes. So this, as I said before, the tool is Excel based. That means we have the flexibility to switch on and off certain modules, and also to develop additional ones or devise the different steps according to the user needs. So there is this flexibility. So I'm going to present just a version of this tool, and as I said before, certain things can be according to the needs can be devised. So starting from the type of prioritization, we could select if it's adaptation mitigation. For this example here, we assume that is for the mitigation problem, and we have the greenhouse gas emissions profile. So what actually we do at this stage is just plugging in the information generated from greenhouse gas emissions inventory, identifying the sectors that they mostly contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So we get the share of emissions, and obviously here this will show and highlight where we have to think to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and which sectoral actions we can identify, which is the next step. And here we just identify the actions. As I said before, this version is flexible, that the user could type any kind of action that we like to type, but we are in the process of developing a drop list of linking different sectors to possible actions, possible solutions that the user will be able to click on to select out of the list or add additional ones. So here we have identified just 7 actions. We identify the sector, if it's residential, transport, waste, and so on. Also, we can define the time frame, if it's short-term, medium-term, or long-term. So how much will take to implement such a kind of measure. So this will give us some information with regard to planning. And often we could aim for blending options of short-term to medium-term and long-term actions. We could add a description, and here the source could be the source of getting information about this action. Then the next step on the selection of criteria, again, at this stage, at this version, it's very open step, meaning that the user could just select any criterion or objective that he feels is relevant in the local context, and just identify the type, the category of criteria. Is it climate related, or is it environmental, economic, feasibility, like public acceptance, social, and so on. Again, we are also working on having another drop list here of possible default pre-selected criteria where the user could either select or add in addition to those. Furthermore, you can see the column of units. We need to identify the different units. I'm showing that to let you know that even in cases with different measurement units, we can perform the analysis, which is often quite challenging. Then we need to identify if we want to maximize or minimize the criteria. So, for example, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, we want to maximize. So we select to maximize that. Criterion of cost, we want to minimize that. So we select minimization. After completing this step, of course, now looks easy, but as I said before, this could be a very long process by having a stakeholders consultation, group discussions, and the idea is to make it as much participatory as possible by integrating different groups of stakeholders that would be affected by the decision. Then we move on to the scores, to the impact matrix. So what you see here, I'm not sure if you can clearly see. So this is the step where different experts can identify scores, values, predictions, judgments on how the different solutions perform or score against our criteria. If we don't have expert judgments group and have studies that they have performed the impact assessment or economic assessment and so on, we can just plug in the information as one expert. So, and then we will have again the final scores or the final impact matrix based on that. And we get on a kind of summary on how different actions, measures score against our selected criteria. Often this process is time consuming, it requires data, It requires studies, could take 1 year to get related data and so on. But on the other hand, including experts, we could have a kind of approximation or qualitative assessment of the different actions, and therefore use this information in a shorter period of time to complete the process. Then just to add here that we could, of course, we have a simple version of the tool where we use the scale from 1 to 5 to show the relative score between the different actions. So instead of going into a long process, very time-consuming and expensive process of impact assessment, we could have a more qualitative, simple one where we express the relative score between the different actions, of course by including experts or people that are experienced in such a kind of context, and really identify the level of impact of the different actions. Will be high impact, very high, moderate, low, or very low. So we could translate that to a scale 1 to 5. 5 is very high impact, 1 very low impact, and this could be established at the unit selection step. So, so here we could have a more sophisticated and complicated impact assessment, or a more qualitative and simpler. So based on the different units here, we can have an automated normalization. The idea is that the maximum score gets 1 point, the minimum score gets 0, and all other values are expressed and reflected proportionally in this scale 0 to 1. And based on that, we can have a first idea, and this is an automatically generated graph where you can see how the different actions meet or perform against our criteria. So from this step already, we can see that the green energy supply, solar hot water systems, electric vehicles perform better than waste to energy, street lighting, and cogeneration with regard to the selected criteria. I would like to emphasize here that the whole process and the final outcome is very much dependent on the number criteria, on the type of criteria we select, and of course on the weighting of criteria, which is the next step. So here what we see is how the different actions score against the selected criteria, having equal importance. So assuming that local air pollution has the same importance as greenhouse gas emissions reduction, or same importance as the criterion of cost, which is normally not the case. Often cost is a very important criterion. We have limited budgets, so cost is something that we do care, of course, but also we might have more urgent and relevant to the local context objectives and criteria. Then, therefore, we need to integrate these relative importance factors, or the weights, as we call them. So again, here we can include, as I said before, we can have different ways of including the stakeholders' preferences. One could be through a traditional consultation, a stakeholder consultation process, using brainstorming techniques, discussing about the relative importance. Of course, this should be somehow guided from the CLIMACT Prio tool in order to get the right information and being able to plug in the right information. So this could be done either at the group-based approach, or could be done at an individual, so that each different stakeholder group, as you see here, we have identified different stakeholders who could be representatives of stakeholder groups, and they could express the factors of relative importance. Of course, this could be done again, as I said, in a group discussion context. The main steps to determine the weights, to determine the factors of relative importance, are the following. First, we need to rank the criteria from the most important to the least important. So here are our criteria that they have been selected in the previous step. Then we need to see and rank the criteria from most important to least important. So here we assume that cost is the most important criterion, and we select one. So it's the first ranked criterion. Then local air pollution is it's an urgent, relevant issue for the local community. So we rank this as the second most important. Then public acceptance is very important criterion as well. So it will be the third rank criterion, and so forth. Right? That's the first step, the first task. The second one would be really to identify the level of importance from very low to very high, just to express that verbally. So the most important criterion, we would expect that it's a very high important criterion. So we select this verbal expression. Then local air pollution, this is also a very high criterion. Then public acceptance, it's a different level, high and moderate, or very low and low. We express that level of importance per criterion. And the last step in this weighting process is to give values, to give points of relative importance, to really express this relative importance in numbers. And how do we do that? The approach, the method we apply here is by allocating 100 points to the most important criterion and expressing all the other criteria in relation to that by giving a lower number. So for the criterion of local air pollution, which is very high, we could choose from 90 to 100. If we choose 100, that means that it has equal importance with the criterion of cost. If we choose 90, that means it's the 90% of importance of cost criteria. And the same we do for the rest of the criteria. So we select the associated scale that would express the relative importance in points between the different criteria. So for each level, there is an associated scale. For moderate level of criteria, we can choose between 50 and 60. So based on that, we determine automatically the final criteria weights, or the factors of relative importance. If each stakeholder will do that at an individual basis, at the end we can see, here is up to 8 stakeholders, at the end we can see the level of convergence or divergence between the different stakeholders. And this will really show us where we can further discuss about those differences and disagreements. In case of a group consensus building workshop or discussion, we do this process with pen and paper, using boards and any other traditional communication skills, and we determine the factors of relative importance as a group, and we just plug in the information here, and we can have the final graph, the final weights that reflect the level of relative importance of our criteria. Then based on that, we have incorporated both the scores of our actions, of our measures, and the criteria weights, and then we can have the final results. So we can see this graph. And as I said before, what we see here is that the highest ranked options, actions, measures really meet the most important criteria. They score better in those criteria. As you can see here, green energy supply, it really has high reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, reduction of local air pollution. It's widely accepted. It can create a certain number of jobs. It achieves Millennium Development Goals at a certain extent, and it's very costly. It's the most costly option. That's why you don't see here. It was valued in the standardization level as 0. So it has the lowest relative score on cost. That's why it's not integrated here. But even though it meets most of other criteria objectives, and that's why it's the highest ranked alternative. So then I would like again to emphasize here that the final outcome and what we see here as best option or as final ranking is highly influenced by the inputs, so by the weights. So those outcomes are context specific and stakeholder specific. So we should use the results with caution. The idea is just to provide a process and be transparent and explanatory on how certain actions, options, decisions, what will be the impact. Yeah.
Stelios, there were two questions.
Stop, yeah?
Two questions from our Indian colleagues, so maybe you can take a look at those. Ashish asks, does this tool also assess the feasibility of a particular type of action in a certain region?
The feasibility. So as I said before, this is not happening here automatically, so to say. What can be done is assess the actions, the different options or solutions against feasibility criteria. So we can just select feasibility related criteria like public acceptance, expenses, so financial viability, technical feasibility, existing capacity. So implementation is, so having a kind of screening process or feasibility assessment by selecting the relevant criteria for that. As I said before, we are aiming to distinguish those two steps, this feasibility screening step from the impact assessment step, where we really assess impacts, environmental impacts, social impacts, and so on.
Okay. Another question from Ashish. How does one define the difference amongst importance, values, and weights while assigning these numbers? Looking at the rank, importance, and values.
I'm not sure if I understood the question. Let me see, it's written there, right?
Yep.
How does one define difference?
In part, I think that's part of the discussion that you have with your stakeholders, because they need to decide on these, on the weights.
Yeah, of course. I'm not sure if I understood the discussion, but definitely this is something that is part of the discussion of the process between the different stakeholders. They determine that based on the importance of the particular criterion to the local context. Is there pollution something? Is it a problem? Is it something that is more important than reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which is a global issue? I would assume yes. So the stakeholders, through discussion, will determine that.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Stelios. I think it was very useful for you to take us through the tool, so thanks a lot. We appreciate your time and also look forward to the next training session with Veronica in Hanover. There we have 7 confirmed trainees so far. Probably won't be much bigger group, but I think it's also good to have a small group and really intensively dig into the next session. So our time is unfortunately up, so I think people, if you have more questions, please send them by email to Anna. She can collect them, and then we pass it on to Stelios and Veronica to see how we can respond to these as well. Then one of the first questions I already received, which was, can we get a hold of the tool now to play with it? So may we share that with the colleagues, or is it a bit early, or what do you think?
I think, yeah, why not? That's possible, and could be, you know, a good preparation for the training in Hanover, because anyway, this will be handed there. So I think, yeah, that's possible.
Okay, great. Then please
as a preparation step for the training in Hanover, because. I'm a bit, you know, I really think that there are issues that the users will definitely see and would like to ask. So that's why I think it's important to have this face-to-face training and dig into the details in order to be well equipped to train others.
Okay. I fully agreed. Okay, under that condition, only for internal use, not for any use with city work at the moment until we get the training in Hanover. That's great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. For those people who have shared a link, because we can't see who actually attended the training, then just send us the names. I just want to keep track of who participated in this training. From ICLA Africa, you said you have 3 people, so I know of 2. The third one, just send me the name, then we can keep that track of the training activities. Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And we'll talk to a lot of you again on Monday at our COP Warsaw assessment webinar. So until then, have a good time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.